Hey there friends, and welcome to LaughNapkin. My name is Frank, and today I have 3 stories from r/Prorevenge. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. I lived across the street from a very bored stay-at-home mom, whose excess idle time turned her into an insufferable busybody. One day, her husband backed out of the driveway and slammed into my roommate's car that was parked at the curb. He apologized, gave us his insurance info, and took care of it. He was never a problem because he accepted responsibility for what he did. His wife, however, demanded that we never park any cars at the curb again because we can't get out of our driveway otherwise. The street was very wide. She was just completely unable to accept that the accident was her husband's fault and figured we were somehow responsible for it, ergo we were responsible for preventing it in the future. We told her that we would avoid parking there whenever possible, but that we still had the legal right to park in the street, and that if necessary, we would still do so, and that it was her and her husband's responsibility to avoid hitting other people's legally parked cars when backing out of the driveway. She wasn't happy with that answer, but just told us we better stay out of her family's way, and stormed off. One day, she came storming over, banging on the front door, cussing us out. We got her on our security camera saying, "If you don't move that effing car in the next 10 minutes, I'm going to effing total it with my truck. It'll be your fault, and you'll have to pay for the damage to my effing vehicle." To this, I simply responded, "I don't know whose car that is, but I didn't park it there. I have you on camera, so if you do anything to that car, I'll have to call the police and hand over this tape." She then threatened to sue me for invasion of privacy for recording her, and still insisted that we move the car even though it wasn't our property. We just ignored her, and she didn't do anything to the car. We did keep the recordings though. A few weeks later, I had a friend visit from out of town. He parked his car on the curb, and then started unloading some stuff from his trunk. She came storming out, screaming and cussing at him. "I have told you repeatedly never park your car on this curb. If you don't move it, I'm going to effing total it, and you can effing pay for a new damn car, as well as the damage you do to mine." He tried to calm her down and asked if there was somewhere else he could park, and she replied, "You can park it in hell, because that's where you'll be after I effing take your life." Unfortunately for her, he had his dash cam running the whole time and it captured everything. He called the police and she was arrested for threatening to commit vandalism and for threatening violence. A few days later, she left a long-winded hate letter in our mailbox. It was written as if it were an open letter from the entire neighborhood. It basically said that nobody knows who you are. Everyone wishes you would move away. Nobody wants you living in our neighborhood. Thing is, she forgot about our security cameras. I took the video of her opening my mailbox, which included her taking all our letters out of the mailbox and rifling through them, and I gave them to the post office. This led to her getting arrested for a second time that week. After that, we used her 2 arrests, our collection of security and dashcam footage, and her letter to get a restraining order against her that actually prohibited her from entering her own home. And then we called the police every time we saw her because she was in violation of the order. She ended up having to live in a hotel room, and her husband came over, apologized to us, and asked if we would drop the restraining order so his wife could come home. I told him I would do it, but only if she wrote me, my wife, our roommates, and the friend of mine she threatened a 1-page apology for her harassment, and that she would promise to never contact us again for any reason whatsoever moving forward. I received no apology, and the house went on the market a week later. Some effing people. My uncle is an Indian doctor. In the 90s, there was a massive doctor shortage in Australia, so the government gave him citizenship. Unfortunately, you still had to sit 3 expensive exams to work as a doctor in Australia. These exams cost thousands of dollars, only happened twice a year, had limited seating spots times, and had arbitrary pass-fail marks. So many Indian doctors ended up becoming taxi drivers, small businessmen, etc. My uncle decided instead he would reapply and go through Australian medical school. Sure enough, being a doctor for 10 plus years makes medical school easy, and my uncle was top of his class. He decided since he was already pushing 40 and had a family, he would apply to become a GP, family physician, instead of applying to be a surgeon like most of his teachers had suggested. At the time, many desperate foreign doctors were applying for GP residency. They would essentially get treated like crap. They would be forced to work unpaid overtime. They would not be given proper study time or leave to sit mandatory exams. They would pocket the meals, accommodation, study leave allowances that you were supposed to be paid by the training college. They would roster you to work every Saturday, Sunday shift, and if you refused, they would give you a bad review and your training would be jeopardized. This mostly happened to foreign doctors, as most of them would be in bad debt and highly desperate for any sort of work. When my uncle graduated, he applied for a GP training in a practice that is located within an Indian ethnic enclave, so he would have access to religious foods, schools, etc. for the kids. This practice engaged in all of the above effery. My uncle would work every single Saturday shift. During his dedicated study time, he would have to come into work. He got reprimanded for not overcharging patients in line with their framework. Worst of all, when my aunt was really sick and hospitalized, they wouldn't give him any time off to look after her and the kids. The owner of the clinic was a white GP who was openly racist against Indians, Asians, and Aboriginal people, who were a large percentage of the clientele of this clinic. My uncle bided his 3 years, and as soon as his documentation came through, making him a GP, he quit that instant. He went down to the local bank and got a loan to open up his own practice. All of his old patients quickly moved with him to the new practice. The first year he struggled, but his practice quickly became known and word spread. Surprise, surprise! Foreign trained doctors actually work well and care about their patients if you actually care about them and give them appropriate wages and living conditions. More patients and more doctors looked to work with my uncle. Within 2 years, my uncle had a GP practice that had 4 doctors, 2 nurses, 2 trainees, and a manager. This practice easily rivaled his original teachers. He then started 2 more GP practices with the money he was pulling in. These practices trapped his old teacher's clinic in a 2-kilometer triangle. He would advertise heavily and make sure he could take as much business from his old teacher as he could. Within 5 years, his old teacher's practice went from having 6 doctors, 4 nurses, and 6 trainees to just 1 doctor, his old teacher, and no one else. His old teacher tried to sell up his practice to other doctors, but no one would purchase it given how successful my uncle's 3 surrounding practices were. He even tried to sell it to my uncle, who refused to buy even at a ridiculously low sale price. Instead, he waited for the bank to repossess his old teacher's clinic, and then repurchased it for a bit more money from the bank. My uncle then repurposed the building into his main offices from where he runs his 3 practices. He made sure to redevelop his old boss's room into staff toilets, just as one final tribute to the human turd that was his old boss. About 3 years ago, I was working in a pretty big factory. They hired through 5 different temp services, so the place was pretty much like a revolving door. People came and left without any warning. Sometimes it was hard to just find a familiar face. So when someone started stealing my lunches, everyone became a suspect. After falling victim to the lunchbox bandit for a week straight, I'm talking about 6 12-hour days with no lunch. Needless to say, the frustration spawned several evil plans. But I felt like the California Reaper would give me the fastest and most effective results. All I know was people were going to think twice before stealing lunches. I spent all night making the best steak fajitas for lunch the next day. I finally minced the Reaper peppers into a nice pico de gallo and topped my devil fajitas off. I carefully placed my fajitas into a Tupperware bowl, garnished them with cilantro and limes, then covered them with a clear lid to display their beauty. The next morning, about an hour after I placed them in the fridge, a woman started screaming for help. I ran to the lunchroom to find the lunchbox bandit laying on the floor gasping for air. The Reaper peppers triggered an asthma attack, and he had to be rushed to the hospital. He never said anything, and neither did I, until now. Okay guys, I hope you all enjoyed today's video, and I'll see you in the next one.